A group of individuals sat drinking together, discussing how humans were untrustworthy and always ready to betray their partners at any moment. They agreed that trust among them was nothing more than a fantasy, with one of them loudly shouting that humans could not be trusted at all. A few weeks ago, on the outskirts of the Labyrinth city of Terranea, some monsters invaded the human settlements. An adventurer named Argus shouted, informing everyone that the iron-fingered beast general was there. Nearby, a boy named Nick watched them fight the monster. Another adventurer, Garosso, attacked the monster with a sword, causing it to bleed, but the beast was strong enough to counterattack instantly. Argus dodged the attack, saving Garosso. Garosso thanked him and resolutely told him to keep moving. Argus moved forward and struck the monster, killing it with a single blow. Holding the monster's head as a trophy, he showed off to the others. The adventurers cheered, happy that their quest was completed, while Nick watched them laugh and celebrate. He then approached Argus proudly and said it was now time for him to do his job. He examined the monster and began gathering materials. Garosso commented on how impressed he was by the clean cut of the bone, but Nick acknowledged that he couldn't achieve such precision even with Argus's training. After collecting the materials, Nick started walking away. Garosso asked if he was done already. Nick looked at him and replied that it was his job, and it got easier once he got used to it. He asked Garosso if he wanted to do it, but Garosso said he was fine. Nick took a deep breath and said he would give Garosso a share when they exchanged the materials for money and put it in the bank. He mentioned that he wasn't making any allowances as long as he was managing their money, but Garosso told him to just do it. Annoyed, Nick asked how many times they'd already had this conversation. Garosso begged for a chance, but Nick told him that hearing that from a guy grossed him out. Garosso insisted that being generous was very adventurer-like, and Nick mentioned that the other day, Argus bought drinks for the whole bar. Garosso shouted in excitement that it was so cool, but Nick annoyedly told him that it drained all their funds, which is why he was managing their money. He showed Garosso the sack of coins and told him to go away. Garosso acknowledged that, and while Nick was checking the monster, he saw the sack of coins beside him and smiled. In the Café Fromage in the city of Terranea, Nick was sitting with a girl and handed her a locket. She held it happily and asked the reason behind the gift. He explained that she had wanted equipment with some resistance attached. She asked if she could try it on. He smiled and nodded, and she put on the locket, asking how it looked. Nick told her it looked great. She expressed her gratitude, and Nick explained that it wasn't easy to get because it had high elemental and curse resistance. She thanked him again, and Nick started blushing. He told her that he was still not really a member of their all-martial arts party, so he needed to learn those sorts of things, but he also retrieved materials and balanced their account book. She assured him that it was all right and smiled at him with loving eyes. While looking into his eyes, she said he needed a lot more than he thought, and she was sure he would take all martial arts from rank C to rank A soon. Blushing, he held the cup of tea and told her that would be great before taking a sip. He explained that Argus had taken a useless kid like him and turned him into what he was now, so he had to pay him back. She continued looking at him with a smile and questioned how the quest went, asking if he made a lot of money. He smirked and replied more or less, confusing her. She asked if something had happened. Nick remained silent for a moment, then explained he had finishing adding the money they got from the quest and the materials to their bank account. But it didn't add up. They had less money than they should. She looked at him confused and asked if there was any possibility it might be the guild's fault or a calculation error. Thinking critically, he said he was wondering if someone had stolen it, but then questioned why they wouldn't have stolen everything. She agreed, and he said that the only option left was that one of their party members was responsible. She asked if he thought it was Garosso, and he wondered if she thought that too. He told her sadly that he had no proof, and if he reported Garosso, it would mean selling out his party member. She held his hand and hesitantly told him that, in her opinion, he should report it because Garosso was the only suspect, and if he wanted to advance their party to rank A, this was necessary. Looking at her confused, he was wondering if selling out his party member was right, but he remembered he was only doing this for Argus. After thinking about it for a while, he stood up and told her that he would tell Argus, saying if he left it be, their party would be out on the street. She smiled and agreed with his decision. He thanked her and they both said goodbye. As she was saying goodbye, a man sat behind their table, listening to their conversation. While walking in the market, Nick was thinking about whether he should tell Argus about Garosso, what the consequences would be, and if it would lead to Garosso being expelled from the party. He knew Argus had the final say and was also a softie who might say that this was just how adventurers were. However, he decided to tell him for now. As he was thinking about all of this, he suddenly heard a woman call Garosso's name. He looked around and saw Garosso flirting with her, showing her a sack of coins and asking how many bottles of wine he could buy with it. Nick angrily grabbed him, and the woman asked who he was. Garosso introduced Nick as one of his partners. Nick, with an angry expression, accused Garosso of taking their party's money, but Garosso smirked and denied it. Nick asked him why Garosso had the money to buy as much wine as he wanted. With a smile, Garosso explained he had savings, and he was good at managing money. Nick pointed out it was the first time he had heard that, and questioned why someone with savings was always asking him for money. The woman next to him also looked at Garosso with confusion. After a brief silence, Garosso admitted Nick was right. Nick asked him how he expected anyone to react and stated that now Argus would deal with him. Angered, Garosso left and Nick stood there reassuring himself that this was all for their party. The next day, Nick went to Argus to talk. Argus asked if he wanted a drink and Nick opted for water. Argus offered alcohol too and poured water into a glass as he asked what Nick wanted. Nick explained the incident from the previous night and Argus asked if he had spoken to Garosso. Nick confirmed he had and mentioned Garosso had apologized. Argus asked if he had apologized sincerely. Nick looked at him skeptically, so Argus asked about his intentions. While drinking, Argus calmly stated he wasn't going to take any action, noting that Garosso had apologized, which was what an adventurer should do. Nick exclaimed that there was no way he could forgive Garosso for stealing their party's money. Argus calmly asked why he shouldn't forgive his partner, and Nick angrily explained that it was precisely because Argus forgave and covered for him that Garosso felt justified in his actions. Angrily, Argus slammed his drink down and demanded that Nick shut up. He asked Nick if he was even in a position to talk, giving him a side-eye and mentioning that Garosso had accused Nick of stealing too. Nick stood there, bewildered, unable to believe that Argus could think that. He insisted that he had been managing their party's wallet and there was no doubt about that. Argus looked annoyed as he took another sip of his drink and reminded Nick that when he had joined the party, he was just a kid who could get knocked over by a breeze. Nick acknowledged that he wasn't as physically strong as the others and sipped his water, noticing that Argus seemed different today. Pouring himself another drink, Argus continued, saying that strength wasn't just about physical prowess. He emphasized that real strength included being able to assert your innocence directly to your leader, negotiating with merchants on equal footing. After saying this, Nick fell silent, pondering Argus's words. Argus then remarked that adventuring wasn't suited for Nick anyway. Confused, Nick asked angrily what he meant by that. Argus calmly explained that adventurers were rough individuals whose main skill lay in physical strength. Despite appearing cool, they were generally unreliable compared to smart people and those in high social positions. He stated that people with good grades and skills typically pursued proper jobs instead of becoming adventurers. Nick countered, mentioning that he had seen adventurers who were capable of such things. He asked if Argus was implying that smart people couldn't be adventurers. Argus looked at him directly and stated that at the very least, he didn't need them in his party. Nick stared at him in shock, his eyes widening. Argus confirmed if Nick understood that they had different ways of thinking. He told Nick that he used to rely on others, but now he was his own adventurer with his own way of thinking. Argus stated that he had no intention of changing to accommodate someone else, so he suggested there was no reason for Nick to remain in the party anymore. Nick looked saddened, and Argus asked if he was mistaken. However, Nick replied that he shouldn't waste his time in a place like this and affirmed that if he aimed for the top, he would achieve it and become an A-rank adventurer. Argus countered that C-rank was suitable for martial arts and if anyone was wasting away, it was Nick. Nick then asked if Argus would prefer Garosso over him, to which Argus agreed. Argus explained that people like Garosso had no choice but to be adventurers and the best he could achieve was C-rank, whereas Nick had more potential. Argus expressed that he didn't want to discuss what was right or lawful. Nick angrily finished his glass of water and slammed it on the desk. He stood up abruptly and declared that he had nothing left to do in the party either. Argus acknowledged Nick's decision calmly while continuing to drink. Nick bid him to take care and walked away. While walking through the market, Claudine stopped him and pulled him aside, asking if he had been expelled from the all martial arts. Nick sat down sadly and confirmed it, apologizing that it was after he took her advice too. Claudine told him bluntly that without martial arts, Nick was just a weak light warrior, and she had rooted for him to rise to A rank and increase their rewards, but it was all a disappointment. As she turned to walk away, Nick tried to grab her hand, but suddenly a tall man grabbed his hand and asked if he didn't understand, smirking at him. Nick demanded to know who the man was, and the man introduced himself as one of Claudine's partners from the Steel Tiger crew. He referred to Claudine as his cute little scout and told Nick he was causing her trouble. Angered, Nick stated that he was talking with his girlfriend and told the man not to interfere. Claudine blushed and asked Nick to stop. but Nick suddenly noticed that the man was wearing the locket he had given Claudine as a gift. Nick angrily asked Claudine if she gave him the locket. She admitted that he had done everything for her, buying her things and teaching her whenever she asked, but she smilingly pointed out that unfortunately, he was not her type. Nick felt disappointment well up inside him as he realized he had just been a source of money for her all this time. Claudine hugged him and sarcastically asked if it felt good to be her benefactor. Nick questioned if it had all been a sweet dream, but Claudine coldly waved goodbye, telling Nick he was no longer worth anything to her. Nick stood there in shock as they walked away. After standing in the rain for a while, Nick angrily pondered why he had worked so hard, wanting to repay Argus for raising him like a son, while realizing Claudine had only seen him as a money toy. Confusedly wondering who had come upon him, he noticed it was a girl who placed an umbrella over his head. She asked if he was alright, and noting he looked awful, and requested him to hold the umbrella while she fetched something to wipe. A ticket fell from her, which she picked up and returned to her. She identified herself as an idol and invited him to come, promising he wouldn't regret it before running off, leaving Nick standing there, holding the umbrella in confusion. Later, he attended the show and was surprised by the large crowd. He wondered what an idol thought about and realized he had been swept along by her energy, though such places weren't typically for him at the time. Considering he might not be able to return the umbrella, he decided to head home. Just as he was about to leave, the lights suddenly went off, making him think that there might have been a power cut. Abruptly, a girl's voice thanked everyone for coming, startling him. He looked up in shock to see the entire band on stage, dressed in miniskirts and exuding immense energy through the microphone. The audience erupted in excitement, and Nick stared in astonishment. The girl spotted him and winked, causing Nick to realize she was the idol. She asked if everyone was having fun, and the crowd cheered loudly. Meanwhile, Nick found himself caught up in excitement, shouting that Agate was the best. He started attending live events as if possessed, buying an Agate-signed navy blue Hanton and matching glow sticks. Lost in the enthusiasm of cheering and supporting Agate, he momentarily forgot about the harshness of reality. When he finally snapped out of it, he realized he had spent almost all the money he had saved. Sitting sadly on his bed, he resolved that it was time for him to start working again. He decided to form a new party, knowing that the general rule was to explore labyrinths. The Adventurers Guild New Bead subdivision was where new adventurers gathered, so he headed there in search of potential party members. Greeting a boy and a girl, they looked at him confusedly, and suddenly, Nick remembered Claudine's harsh words that he was no longer part of the party. He stood there in silence, and the boy pointed out that he looked awful. Nick sadly replied that it was nothing, and then headed to the bar. Sitting in the bar, Nick pondered that he couldn't form a party under these circumstances. Suddenly, he heard a group of voices cheering about forming their new party. Everyone around them was expressing mutual trust and support. One of them noticed Nick sitting alone and invited him to join their table. Nick accepted and sat with them, unlikely to have come alone to a bar popular among new adventurers. He smiled to himself, sarcastically thinking that these adventurers were just waiting to betray each other. As they all finished drinking, Nick slammed his mug on the table and exclaimed loudly that humans could not be trusted. The others at the table stared at him in shock, marking the beginning of a story where 4 individuals had lost faith in people. The next day, Nick woke up feeling a headache and looked around, realizing he had drunk a bit too much the night before. He noticed the other people sleeping nearby and wondered where he was and who they were. Reflecting on the previous night at the bar when he shouted that humans couldn't be trusted and received surprised looks, Nick apologized, explaining that he had been under a lot of stress. The other 3 individuals also seemed embarrassed and agreed with him. One of them asked Nick what he was doing there, noting he didn't seem like a new adventurer. Seeing their curious expressions, Nick smiled awkwardly after a moment of thought and confessed that he had been expelled from his former party. They looked at him sympathetically as Nick continued, explaining that his former party members were reckless adventurers who couldn't stop spending money. He had taken on the responsibility of managing their finances, but they accused him of theft, which he had not done and denied it, even by swearing on God. The man expressed sadness at Nick being falsely accused, to which Nick responded with disappointment in his voice, saying he had always done his best. He described how hard he had worked to repay his leader for everything he had done for him, only for it to all come to nothing. The girl listened with empathy as Nick revealed that his girlfriend had also abandoned him, realizing she had only seen him as a source of money. Agreeing with Nick's pain and betrayal, the girl sympathized with him. Nick smiled ruefully, admitting that in his desperation, he had become a fan of idols and now found himself penniless. He had hoped to form a new party to make some money, but felt irritated by his inability to do so. Apologizing for going on about his sad story, he asked them if it sounded pathetic. All 3 of them shouted, telling Nick that that wasn't true. One of the girls shared her story, revealing that she had been dumped by her fiancé, a noble named Lin, who then got her expelled from the noble school and kicked out of her home. She tearfully confessed that she had fallen from nobility to become a commoner, reassuring Nick that he didn't need to be formal with her anymore. Nick looked at her sympathetically, realizing she had faced worse circumstances than he had. She explained that she had hoped to find work in the Labyrinth city, but had no luck, especially since local circumstances made it difficult to find a job as a sorcerer. As a result, she had turned to gambling and ended up losing all her money. With tears in her eyes, she blamed herself for everything. All three of them immediately reassured her, telling her it wasn't her fault. It was Lin's fault for what he had done to her. She sadly admitted that no one had ever comforted her like this before. Nick offered her a handkerchief to wipe her tears, feeling a bit embarrassed by how she used it. Afterwards, Nick turned to the priest and asked if he had also experienced something painful, initially reluctant to share. The priest, named Sem, eventually relented when the girls insisted. Nick smirked, pointing out how they were willing to share their stories. Sem took a deep breath and introduced himself as a former priest. When asked if he was no longer a priest, he confirmed it, revealing that he had been framed by a girl under his care. He had spent 3 months in prison on false charges of sexual assault, a result of the girl's love turning into hatred. After his release, he had been wandering alone. He revealed that despite being a priest, he had indulged in carnal pleasures. Nick chuckled, commenting that was why he was now a former priest. Sem confirmed it, explaining that it wasn't that he was poor, but he had started frequenting hostess bars due to needing money, which he found pitiful. Nick admitted that normally he wouldn't sympathize with someone wasting money in such places, but after hearing Sem's story, he couldn't judge. The girl also tried to cheer Sem up, and he was moved to tears by their understanding. Nick then turned to the other girl, thinking about how dragon people were highly regarded for their bravery. Tiana held her hand and asked if something painful had happened to her. With a smile, she introduced herself as Karan, a dragon person. She recounted how she had been betrayed by a trusted party member, tricked and left behind on the lowest floor of a mid-level labyrinth. She nearly died there, and something very important to her was stolen. Nick looked at her in shock, thinking that leaving someone in such a perilous situation was akin to murder. Tears streaming down her face, Karan blamed herself for being naive, but she passionately declared that regardless of anything, betraying someone like that was unforgivable. Tiana and Sem nodded in agreement, while Nick sat quietly, deeply affected by her story. Tiana asked if Karan had also been addicted to something like they had been, but Karan admitted her weakness was gourmet food. She had spent all her money indulging her love for eating. After that, they ordered another round of ale and continued drinking. While Nick was looking at the empty bottles from the previous night, Tiana woke up with a headache and mentioned that memories of the night were starting to return. She explained how they had been kicked out of the bar when it closed and ended up drinking here. Nick nodded, acknowledging the numerous empty bottles as evidence of their night. Sam apologized, suggesting they clean up and leave, but Tiana reassured him that it was all right. Nick reflected that alcohol had helped them open up emotionally, but now they seemed to be back to where they started. His attention turned to Karan, who sat quietly in the corner looking sad. Nick suddenly recalled the idle game incident and realized he now understood why Agate had approached him. He felt that leaving Karan alone would only lead to more unhappiness for her. While Sem and Tiana also faced challenges, Karan's situation seemed worse. Nick thought about how anyone could be a warrior if they were strong, but being a dragon person was a different matter. They couldn't rely on manipulation like Claudine. Karan's only viable option seemed to be becoming an adventurer, but without a party, she risked falling to the bottom of the Labyrinth city, or worse, being captured by slavers or implicated in a murder. Lost in his thoughts about Agate and the others, Nick snapped back to the present when Sem asked him what he was thinking. Nick explained that he was considering whether they could continue living like this. He then turned to Tiana, asking if she wasn't worried about rent. Surprised, Tiana asked how he knew. Nick replied that everyone here seemed to share similar worries. Seeing everyone looking at him sadly, he proposed forming a party as a solution. Nick asked everyone, "How about we form a party?" Hearing this, everyone looked at each other in shock, thinking about their traumas. They remained silent for a while until Tiana spoke up, saying she appreciated his offer, but didn't think she could do that. Joining her, Karan and Sem also gave similar responses, saying they couldn't trust people so easily anymore. Nick looked out the window, thinking it wouldn't be easy, but after being saved by that passing idol, could he really ignore someone in an even worse position than himself? How could he raise his head with pride and support Agate as a fan of idols if he did that? Thinking about that, he told them he understood why they couldn't trust each other so easily, but he also pointed out that none of them had been able to form a new party. Tiana agreed, acknowledging he was right. Nick then explained that he didn't want to be betrayed either, but if he formed a party elsewhere, he would constantly doubt everyone. He believed they all felt the same, and the most effective solution for the four of them was to form a party together despite their trust issues. Sadly, Tiana said she understood. Nick suggested that they should establish some ground rules. Tiana and Sem wondered what he meant by that, and Nick explained that since they had no choice but to make a living as adventurers, they also needed a plan to prevent betrayal. Tiana asked what kind of plan he had in mind, and Nick explained that there were two main reasons for betrayal: money and personal likes and dislikes. Sem smiled, finding it simple. Nick said that first they could manage their money together. Tiana wondered how, and Nick suggested they could write everything in an account book like merchants do, and rotate who took care of the actual money. Karan became sad, admitting she wasn't good with that, but Nick smiled and told her he could teach her. Karan was stunned, not expecting someone to be so kind to her. Nick knew it was a first for Karan, as ever since she came to the city, she has been told a lot about what to do and what not to do, but nobody had ever offered to teach her. The lack of learning was what led to her being tricked. While she was silent, Nick asked if she simply didn't like handling money. She quickly responded that it wasn't like that at all. She looked down and smiled, thinking about it. Nick then addressed the second point, stating that they should try not interfering with each other's personal affairs. Tiana asked what he meant specifically. He explained that, for example, after they finished exploring the labyrinth, they would divide their rewards and go their separate ways, whether it was food, booze, or any other personal interest. They couldn't complain about what the others were doing. Tiana smiled and thought to herself that gambling was an objectionable interest. Nick then pointed out the issue with drinking, wondering why adventurers liked it so much and why those who didn't had to feel awkward. He questioned why people who loved booze were praised while others were not appreciated based on their work. Tiana noted that he was mixing his grudges into the conversation, but agreed that not denying each other's interests was a good idea. Nick also agreed. However, Tiana mentioned that even if they managed their money by keeping track of everything on paper, the actual handling of money was crucial. She pointed out that taking turns taking care of it increased the chances of it being stolen. She emphasized that strict checking was a measure to prevent mistakes, not necessarily bad intentions. Nick looked at her in a bit of shock and admitted that she was right. She replied angrily that she couldn't help it, and Nick started thinking about it. After some thought, he turned towards Karan and said that for handling money, he would get a safe that couldn't be broken even with magic or a hammer, and he would entrust it to her. She looked at him in shock, and then he looked at Sem and said Sem would take care of the safe's key, while Nick himself would handle the account book. Finally, he looked at Tiana and said she would ensure that their money lined up with the account book. Karan told them that the most important thing in the world to her had been stolen, so she asked, confused, why she was being entrusted with the safe. Nick replied that this was exactly why he needed her. She knew how it felt to have something important taken away, and she would understand the significance of ensuring that that didn't happen to them. Karan not too confidently acknowledged this. Nick gave her a reassuring smile. Sem then asked if he was being given the key because he had been jailed for a crime he didn't commit. He mentioned that he didn't hate the irony. Nick told him that wasn't the intention, but it did seem fitting for him to hold the key. Nick then looked at Tiana and said that since she had been set up by her fiancé and his lover, he trusted her to keep an eye on the money. Tiana asked if he meant she could do it with her poor eyesight. Nick replied that it was a wonderful idea that he hadn't thought of. Tiana looked away and told him that he was too nice. Nick, puzzled, asked what she was talking about. She considered that he had the least opportunity to touch the safe since he only handled documents, leaving the actual money to the others. She didn't say anything about it though, and told him that it was a good idea. She wondered aloud if they could actually pull it off. Sem and Karan smiled at her and said that it was her job to supervise, and she replied that she knew. Karan also assured her that they were counting on her. Nick watched them smile and talk to each other, thinking he was repeating himself, and that was how the party's survivor started. They went to the beginner-level labyrinth, Sticky God Gate, and inside, Sem looked terrified, while Tiana and Karan were ready to fight each other. Inside the labyrinth, Nick killed one of the slimy monsters with his bare hands, and the others looked at him in shock. He told them to see how easy it was so they could feel less terrified. Sem wondered if they could take down slimes that easily, and Nick explained that they were in a beginner-level labyrinth, so it was an easy win for them. While walking in the labyrinth, Karan asked why they were in the beginner level one and suggested that if they had gone to a slightly stronger labyrinth, they could have made more money. Nick explained that there were restrictions on which labyrinths were accessible to G-rank parties like theirs. She mentioned that she had heard if G-ranked adventurers captured 2 out of 3 labyrinths, they could move on to stronger ones. She asked, annoyed, why they had come to the weakest one. The 3 of them looked at Nick, and he admitted she was right, but said it was the first time for Tiana and Sem, so he wanted to start by seeing if they were fit to explore a labyrinth. Karan wondered what he meant, and he told her she had previous experience, so it was not new for her. He asked if she was alright with that. Karan, looking sad, admitted she didn't really remember the G-rank labyrinths as she mostly explored the mid-level ones. Nick smiled, understanding that she was stronger from the start, but explained that for the 3 of them, it was different. Sem asked if that just meant they had to defeat monsters along the sewer and the boss at the end, but Nick told them that wasn't all. There was one more important thing. They had to trade the core they just got for money at the guild. The 3 of them looked at him in shock. Nick explained that if they underestimated the importance of collecting materials, they wouldn't make much money even in harder labyrinths. He emphasized that if they could make money from something so simple, they could earn a lot. He then revealed that the easy part ended there and warned that on the next floor they might get injured. Karan confidently responded that she had taken down orcs and goblins, smiling as she shared her experience with stronger monsters. Sem added that while he hadn't gone that far, he had defeated monsters during his travels. Nick smiled, appreciating their confidence, and told them that it was nice to know he could count on them. With a smile, Nick asked what they could actually do. Initially, the 3 of them looked confused, but then Tiana said she used magic, while Karan and Sem mentioned they used a sword and a mace respectively. Nick facepalmed, realizing he was talking about labyrinth exploration tactics, but he understood that beginner labyrinths were there for them to gain experience. He told them not to waste any more time, so they started moving. As they advanced, they killed a slime, and Karan and Tiana began collecting the materials. Tiana happily revealed that she had collected a lot, and Sem remarked that labyrinth exploration was easy. However, Nick cautioned them, saying the slimes here acted more like monsters, so it wouldn't be so easy in the future. Suddenly, some slimes appeared. Tiana looked at them and smiled, pointing out how cute they moved. Without warning, one of the slimes attacked her. Nick asked if she was fine, and then she called herself an idiot for thinking it was cute. As she was about to use magic, Karan stepped forward to strike. Nick tried to stop Tiana from using her magic, but she had already attacked with an icicle. Karan managed to block it with her sword, looking at Tiana angrily. Tiana apologized, admitting it was her fault, but pointed out that Karan was the one who came forward without looking around. Karan acknowledged that mistakes happen and said that it was her fault for showing an opening. However, she angrily warned Tiana not to complain if she made a mistake next time. Sem was shocked to see them arguing while Nick watched silently. Nick told Sem to keep going and he followed, confused, while Karan and Tiana stood there angrily. Nick understood that they wouldn't trust each other so easily and wondered if they could capture the labyrinth like this. After a while, they finally reached the last floor. Nick informed them that if they defeated the boss there, they would complete this labyrinth. Tiana asked what kind of boss it was and angrily questioned if he didn't know. Sem thought it was unnecessary to speak like that given the tense atmosphere. Nick explained that it was called a huge slime, larger than a cow but otherwise like a regular slime, and they could defeat it in the same way. As they walked forward, they suddenly saw light coming from an opening ahead. Tiana asked if they just needed to defeat it, and Nick confirmed that that was the case. Shielding their eyes from the light, they entered and saw an enormous slime in front of them. Nick noted it was larger than he had expected, and Sem wondered how they were going to defeat something so big. Nick reassured them that it was so simple. They just needed to scrape away at its surface until they reached the core. Tiana moved forward, declaring she would handle it. Nick suggested she listen first, but she insisted on taking it out in one shot, revealing her pent-up anger. Surprised, Nick looked at her as she pulled out her wand. Sem sensed a powerful spell building up, noticing the surroundings beginning to change. Nick tried to warn Tiana to stop, fearing it might backfire. Ignoring his advice, she unleashed her magic spell, Ice Spears, instantly killing the slime. However, as the slime exploded, they were all covered in mucus. Tiana and Karan looked down at their legs, finding the mucus gross. Sem wondered if it was harmful, and Nick assured them that it wasn't poisonous, so they could clean it off with water. Tiana angrily asked Nick if he knew this would happen, to which Nick replied that he had tried to stop her. She retorted angrily that he could have warned them sooner. Nick explained if she just informed him what she was going to do earlier, then he could have given advice beforehand. Karan pointed out to Tiana that it was her fault they were all sticky now. Tiana angrily replied that she was the only one who had done anything before, so why was Karan complaining? Karan argued that it was because Tiana had attacked her from behind and she couldn't trust her instantly. Tiana shouted back that it was her mistake and apologized again. Karan explained that in situations where their partner attacks, it's either kill or be killed, so she couldn't just trust Tiana immediately. Tiana stood silently with a sad expression, silently agreeing with what Karan had said. She smiled and said she wasn't cut out to be an adventurer. She told Nick she appreciated the offer, but they really should disband. Disappointed, Nick sat there and then he took off his shirt, saying they needed to talk. He revealed his specialty in dagger skills and scout abilities, further informing them that he couldn't use magic at all. Karan and Tiana looked at him in shock, wondering what he was doing. Nick explained that since they agreed not to meddle in each other's private lives, knowing each other's combat abilities would reduce their need for caution. He asked if they had any doubts they could take something as collateral. Tiana asked him to put his shirt back on first. Apologizing, Nick put his shirt back on. Tiana then revealed her specialty in combining wind and water magic to create lightning magic. She admitted she wasn't skilled in using fire and earth magic, and with a wink, mentioned she couldn't handle enemies that got too close, needing protection while fighting monsters. Karan sat there pondering why she was revealing her weak point. Sem then spoke next, stating his specialty was in healing, support, and military magic. He wielded a mace and could use healing magic, but he advised against engaging him in a prolonged battle. Nick commented that hearing Sem talk about being killed hurt his heart, giving him a wink and apologizing for the joke. Karan sat there, asking if Sem really had to reveal his vulnerabilities. Nick asked if she didn't want to share hers. She hesitated for a moment, and Nick assured her they wouldn't force her to disclose anything. However, he pointed out that based on her equipment, she engaged enemies directly with her sword, though there were many strategies she could employ, leaving it up to her to decide. Karan asked why Nick wasn't giving orders since he was the leader. Nick looked at her in confusion, explaining that he was leading for now, but if someone else wanted the role, they could have it. Karan asked in shock if he was sure about that. Nick didn't say much in response and suggested they continue. As they stood up, he mentioned it was still early, so he proposed heading towards the Goblin Forest, which was about a 5 to 6 hour walk away. Sem mentioned that his military magic could get them there in half the time, and Nick agreed, telling him that they were counting on him. As they prepared to move, a pendant fell out of Karan's bag. Nick noticed it and pointed out that she had dropped it. Karan looked at the pendant sadly and thanked him. Nick noticed her emotions and then said, "Now, let's head to the Goblin Forest." In the Labyrinth city of Tirane, before Karan encountered Nick and the others and learned about the coldness and ugliness of people, she stood staring at a pendant from a distance in a merchant's shop. The merchant invited her to take a closer look at it. When he mentioned that it cost 2 gold coins, equivalent to 20,000 dinar, Karan was utterly shocked. She realized that it was almost all the money she had, so she reluctantly handed it back to the merchant. The merchant looked at it with shock. Karan wondered what was happening, and the merchant angrily asked her how she could not know, reminding her that as a dragonkin, she needed to be careful. He pointed out scratches on the pendant and insisted that he couldn't sell damaged goods. Karan denied causing the damage, but the merchant warned her not to feign ignorance. The onlookers began murmuring about her, speculating that her claws might have accidentally scratched the pendant. Karan sadly protested her innocence, but the merchant coldly informed her that the city was unforgiving and threatened to involve the Order of the Sun. Karan stood silently, but the merchant softened slightly, acknowledging that he wasn't heartless. He offered to sell her the pendant at half price, considering she hadn't damaged it intentionally. With a smirk, he remarked that it was a costly lesson, warning her to be more careful in the future if she didn't want trouble with the Order of the Sun. Suddenly, Karan's party member, Karios, appeared. She looked at him with relief and excitement. Karios tapped the merchant on the shoulder and asked if there was a problem with Karan. The merchant, still irritated, demanded to know who Karios was and why he was intervening on Karan's behalf. The merchant explained that the pendant had been damaged, making it unsellable for its original price of 20,000 dinar. Karios then approached Karan and asked her to scratch the pendant to confirm the damage. She looked at him in shock. The merchant angrily questioned Karios' actions, but Karios reasoned that since the merchant couldn't sell it anymore, scratching it wouldn't matter. The merchant retorted that Karios could only scratch it if he paid half the price, 10,000 dinar. Karios agreed to pay and then encouraged Karan to scratch the pendant. He reassured her that while it might feel wrong to damage jewelry, it was necessary in this case. Karan reluctantly scratched the pendant, and Karios examined it closely. He pointed out that the scratches made by Karan's nails were not as fine as the ones on the pendant. The merchant looked shocked, stating that it had nothing to do with him since Karios was the one who paid. Karyos quickly checked up his sleeve and revealed a new pendant, smiling as he showed that the merchant had swapped the pendants and had shown Karan the damaged one as a ruse. He explained it was an old trick. Karan looked at Karyos with admiration, thinking he was truly amazing. He then asked Karan if she wanted the undamaged pendant. Excitedly, she nodded. He proposed to the merchant that he let her have it in exchange for not reporting her to the Order of the Sun, and he would also return the money he had paid. Agreeing to the deal, the merchant returned the money to him. She looked at the pendant with joy, knowing it was worth 10,000 dinar. She thanked him warmly, and he smiled back at her. He then suggested they get back to work. When Karan asked where they were going next, he replied they were heading to the lair of the hermit snake, a challenging location. He asked how she was feeling, and she assured him she was ready for it. Content with her response, Karyos urged her to hurry as their two other party members were waiting. When they entered the labyrinth, Karan used her giant sword to kill a monster, slicing it down with one powerful strike. Karyos and the other party members appreciated her efforts, with one member commenting that she cut the silver scissor monster in half, and they couldn't have done it without her. Karyos praised her, telling her she did a good job. Hearing this, Karan was excited, and a big smile appeared on her face. While the party members started looting the materials, Karan stood there sadly. Karyos noticed her sadness and asked what was wrong. She admitted she wasn't sure if she should help, since she always felt like she did nothing. He reassured her that she was important, pointing out that she wasn't good at tearing monsters apart or reading and writing. She agreed, and he told her to leave those tasks to others and focus on what she was good at. He emphasized the importance of trusting her partners and sharing the load. Karan looked at him with a straight face but sad eyes. She then looked at the other members taking the materials and nodded to Karyos, indicating she understood. After that, Karyos said, "Let's keep up the pace," and Karan, looking at her pendant, smiled and said, "Leave it to me." Karyos mentioned that the next floor was the last one and housed the boss of the jar of the hermit snake, which was strong. As they walked, Karyos suddenly told them to wait and warned them that it was ahead in the darkness. A large snake appeared, crawling towards them from the darkness. It was much bigger than they expected. It emerged from a large pot. Everyone looked at each other in shock and terror. Karyos identified it as the pot snake, and Karan admitted she wasn't sure if she could handle it alone. Karyos smiled and told her that she couldn't defeat it alone without a plan. He explained that with the snake inside the pot, magic would just bounce back. He reassured her that they would deal with it together. He instructed Karan to hit the pot as hard as she could, which would make the snake mad and only target her. He would then use support magic to strengthen them and take it down together. Karan looked hesitant, contemplating the situation. With a smile, Karyos reassured her that she would have to put herself in danger for them, but assured her that they would back her up. The other members agreed, and Karan finally said she understood and confirmed she would do it. She firmly held her sword and moved forward to attack the monster. She struck it with her sword, and Karyos ordered them to provide cover fire from the snake. They dodged the snake's attacks, and Karan moved into closer range to strike again. Karan noticed the monster's skin turning green and asked Karyos what to do. Karyos told her it was just trying to intimidate her and assured her that he was getting ready to finish it. He asked her to keep it occupied until then. She did what he told her, and according to their strategy, Karan had to buy some time while the priest buffed Karyos with support magic to kill the monster in one go. However, things didn't go as planned. She attacked the monster and shouted to Karyos for assistance, but there was no response as she continued to deal with it. Meanwhile, the monster started releasing poisonous smoke all around. Karan struggled to breathe properly and shouted for help, pleading with Karyos to assist her, but he smirked without responding. The poison in the pot snake's body was also its energy source, and naturally, when it released its poison, it became weaker. There were a few ways to deal with this, such as defeating it before it released the poison, or using strong anti-poison magic. Karan shouted that the poison mist had cleared, and it was all good for Karyos to attack, but when she looked at him, he was standing on top of a cliff with the other party members. Karyos apologized to her with a smile, and showed his gratitude for dealing with the snake. Karan, with tears in her eyes, wondered why he did that. Another member asked if she was still talking, noting that the poison worked slowly on dragon people, and told her to gather the materials quickly. The members told Karyos he was getting good at the Viper, and Karyos told them to stop it, saying he was still Karyos and that a girl like her was a waste. Karan lay on the ground helpless, and Karyos, while walking away, told her he was not interested in some kid stinking of poison. After saying that, he left. Karan thought it was all a lie, both adventurers and comrades. Everything she believed in had betrayed her, and all she could do was wait for her death. But as she was supposed to die, the anti-poison amulet she was carrying brought her back to life. She opened her eyes wide and looked for Karyos, but could not find him. He had also stolen the dragon people's secret treasure she brought from her hometown. All she had left was the dragon bone sword and the swan pendant Karios gave her. The pendant was a symbol of being saved from a scam, and also a reminder of the one who betrayed her. So she couldn't throw it away. Even though she knew it was a lie, she wanted to hang on to those feelings. She felt disgusted with herself for this and lost in her thoughts. Nick shouted her name repeatedly, asking why she was spacing out. She looked at him, shocked. He asked her to talk to them, but she still couldn't trust this party. Her previous party had made her do troublesome things, and because of that, she didn't know what to do. She looked at him, thinking about her past, and Nick told her they were going to the Goblin Forest. After that, they finally reached the Goblin Forest within 3 hours. They looked at the forest, and Nick appreciated Sem for his ability, remarking how fast it was and how it had a fatigue-reducing effect. He said that with this, they could conquer the Labyrinth and return today, allowing them to reach F rank in 1 day. Sem agreed, and Tiana, with excitement, asked if it meant they could make more money so she could gamble it and make even more. Nick chuckled, asking if that was how she wasted all her money before. She pouted like a child and said she would win next time. Nick then said to Sem that he couldn't believe a temple had let someone like him go. Sem blushed, wishing that was the case. Nick, a bit embarrassed, apologized for his wording, but Sem told him he understood that Nick was complimenting him. Karan asked if he saw the same potential in all of them. Nick confirmed, which made Tiana smile. However, Karan wondered if he would also turn out like Karios. Nick then said, "Let's focus on the Labyrinth." He explained that the monsters in this place were called goblins. He mentioned that while they weren't very strong, they were stronger than slimes, and decided to make a strategy. Sem then brought up something he had been thinking about in the previous labyrinth. Where did the monsters come from? With a smile, Nick wondered if he hadn't explained it already. He told him that labyrinths were places with an exceptionally high concentration of miasma, which caused animals and plants to become monsters. Monsters were born there. Tiana added that she had heard if humans lived in such places for 1 or 2 months, their hearts could be taken over by monsters too. She explained that defeating monsters decreased the miasma, but if they left them alone, the miasma would accumulate, and there would be monsters that could even walk around outside. Sem said that they should defeat as many monsters as they could. Nick agreed and noted that this place was pretty wide, so they should keep walking while checking for goblins. Tiana then said it was her turn, started using her magic, and cast the spell Enemy Detection. Nick was surprised by her magic and wondered what it was. She asked if he didn't know. It was magic that told her where monsters were, and it had a radius of about 3 kilometers. He was amazed and thought that was pretty high-level magic, at least above his former sea-level party. She wondered if that was bad, but he assured her that he was impressed because most people could only use one element, but she could even use support magic. She said it was all thanks to her master, and then he asked her what she had found. She had told him that there was a group of 10 monsters 1 kilometer to the northeast. She wondered what they would do. Nick started thinking about it, and seeing him like that, Tiana asked if it was a problem. He shook his head and told her it was fine, and then asked her to lead the way. They started walking toward the group and saw a bunch of goblins wandering around. He smiled and said it was just like she said. Sem asked what they should do now. Nick thought about it for a second and told Tiana that she would start by using her effect magic. Tiana asked if he just wanted her to start, and he confirmed it. He said that Karan and he would take care of the remaining enemies. Tiana confirmed that she didn't have to hesitate, and Nick told Karan he was counting on her. Nick noticed Karan was still nervous, with lingering distrust from Tiana's miss, and he knew she wouldn't go far as an adventurer if she stayed like that. Tiana used her magic and attacked the monsters. Karan and Nick prepared to attack, but before they could make their move, Tiana herself killed all of them with her magic. Tiana smiled and asked if they should move on now. Nick said he wasn't mad, but wanted to see how the vanguard operated, so he asked her to leave some for them next time. She acknowledged and used her enemy search once again. They encountered another group of goblins. Nick noticed there were 4 of them and told Karan it was their turn now. She agreed, and Nick cautioned her that being too direct might have the opposite effect, so he assured her he would back her up. They then moved to attack. Nick dispatched 1 goblin with his sword, while Karan used her giant sword to kill 2 more goblins. A goblin was about to attack her, so Nick shouted her name as a warning. She noticed and Nick immediately took care of the goblin. He asked if she was alright, and she apologized to him. He reassured her that he wasn't mad and asked if something had happened. Nick wondered if she was okay, mentioning that the first attack had been stronger than he expected, but he was fine. Karan said it wasn't a big deal. Nick asked if he was the only one who didn't help, and Tiana responded that he was the one giving them instructions, so any success was because of him. Nick smiled proudly and questioned if it was really like that. He mentioned that he was actually happy that they listened to him, as his old party members never did. Nick asked Karan if there was anything that was easy or hard for her. She was silent for a while and then said she felt a little lost. Nick asked her what she meant, and she explained that her previous party members never asked her about anything. She just fought as they told her to. Nick understood that most people would teach the basics, but they hadn't taught her because the leader of her previous party wanted to keep her ignorant for his own convenience. Karan apologized, feeling embarrassed, and asked Nick if he was angry with her. He reassured her that he wasn't and gave her a smile. Nick said he would teach her what he could remember and asked if that was all right. He explained that if she didn't learn, it would be a problem because if they formed a party, he wanted her to question him, which required knowledge. Karan nodded, indicating she understood. Nick then glanced at the goblin bodies. Observing them, he thought that there were more goblins than usual and wondered if it was just a coincidence. Tiana informed Nick that she had finished using her enemy search spell again, and Nick said he was coming. After that, Tiana led the way towards more goblins and they encountered and defeated them. Tiana wondered how many they had killed so far. Sem estimated they had taken down about 30, and with a smile, he remarked on how smoothly everything was going. Nick agreed, but he also felt that it was going a bit too well. Tiana mentioned using her enemy search spell again to locate more foes. Meanwhile, Nick observed that Karan's movements still seemed uncertain and nervous. He noted that even in their last battle, she appeared to be waiting for directions from him, indicating that there was something else on her mind. Somewhat alarmed, Sem asked Nick if this could be the work of monsters. Nick examined the situation and pondered whether low-level monsters could cause such destruction to the trees. He admitted he was unsure. Tiana finished her enemy search and questioned Nick about cutting down the tree. Nick clarified it wasn't him, but likely a monster. Tiana then reported detecting about 24 enemies to the north, noting that they had 3 times the magic energy of normal goblins, with one having even more. Nick thought about this revelation, and Tiana asked if he knew what they were facing. Nick nodded in agreement, acknowledging that they were likely facing hobgoblins and possibly an ogre. He explained that in areas with dense miasma, goblins could evolve into hobgoblins, and if hobgoblins survive long enough, they could further evolve into an ogre. He emphasized that this was too much for novice adventurers, warning them that if they weren't careful, they could meet the same fate as the tree they had just encountered. Sem suggested retreating, but Nick disagreed, explaining that ogres often join forces with other goblins to attack villages and towns. He mentioned that it was customary for rookie adventurers to retreat and report to the guild, allowing them to organize a team to eliminate the threat. However, he pondered aloud whether they should proceed differently, noting that more experienced adventurers might just face the challenge head-on. With a smile, Nick turned to Karan and suggested they consider whether to return for reinforcements. He described their party: a sorcerer skilled in multiple elemental magics, a former priest proficient in healing and support spells, and a dragon warrior adept with a large sword. Though they hesitated, Nick reassured them they could probably handle it. He added another crucial factor: finances. Nick pointed out that the money they had collected so far wouldn't be enough for their lodging expenses. This realization shocked them all, but Nick chuckled, explaining that protecting peace and making a living went hand in hand in their line of work. Sem resignedly agreed, wondering about their odds. Nick revealed that ogres had high magic resistance, meaning their options were limited. Sem offered his support nevertheless. Nick decided it was up to the vanguard, but expressed concern over his lack of offensive power. He approached Karan and asked her to lead the charge. Confused, she looked at him, unsure of what to say. Nick understood the gravity of the situation. Similar decisions had led to her abandonment before, but he wanted Karan to make the choice this time. Karan hesitated, feeling a longing for her home, where she helped her mother and faced her father's scolding with determination. She yearned to return to those simpler days, away from the distrust that now paralyzed her legs. Though she knew Nick and the others wouldn't betray her, thoughts of quitting being an adventurer plagued her mind. Gathering her resolve, Karan stood up and declared that she would do it. Nick met her gaze, seeing the sadness in her eyes. He didn't say much, letting her decision stand. Sem, noticing Karan's struggle, asked Nick if he was sure, knowing Karan wasn't in the best state. Nick explained that they had no other choice, understanding the weight of the situation. He smiled at them and encouraged them to face the challenge together. After that, they hid behind the bushes, watching the monster hold the tree on his shoulder. Tiana asked if that was the ogre, and Nick confirmed it. The ogre was massive, accompanied by several small hobgoblins. Suddenly, a bright light surrounded them as Sem cast a sturdy and potent magic spell. Nick thanked them and began explaining the strategy. Sem would strengthen the vanguard, Tiana would eliminate the hobgoblins with her magic, and Karan would take down the ogre. Nick would oversee and coordinate, a common tactic in such situations. They emphasized their reliance on Karan, reminding her of the betrayal she had experienced. Nick looked at Karan's face and asked if she was scared. She retorted, asking if she looked scared, reiterating that she had already committed to the plan. Nick winked and joked that he was actually quite scared himself. Karan asked him not to lie, pointing out that he was a C-rank adventurer who had faced challenges like this before. She clarified that her fear wasn't about facing hobgoblins or the ogre. They were the enemy she could confront. What scared her was whether she could trust the people fighting alongside her. Karan stood there silently. Nick asked her if he was wrong, but she didn't answer. He took a deep breath and looked at her, realizing that overcoming trauma wasn't simple. He explained that they had only known each other for a few days, so it was natural for her to be distrustful. She looked at him with confusion, but he smiled and teased her to doubt him. He encouraged Tiana and Sem to decide for themselves if Nick was worthy of being their partner or not. Tiana interjected angrily, noting that this wasn't a conversation they should be having right before a battle. Nick told her to go ahead and attack. Tiana started casting her magic and launched an attack on the goblins. The ogre glared at her in anger. Nick knew they couldn't defeat the ogre without Karan's attack power, and she needed to reach the ogre before it was fully ready. Karan focused on the ogre, understanding that if she looked back again, she might not be able to shake off her fear. At that moment, Nick wasn't beside her. He had dashed ahead to stand in front of Karan, ensuring she could see him clearly. Tiana urged Karan to keep up with Nick as she was falling behind. Despite her hesitation, Nick's intentional leap forward showed Karan that she wouldn't be left behind. She gathered her resolve and ran forward, facing a horde of goblins ahead. Tiana wondered if Nick could defeat the ogre by himself. Sem remarked that taking down such a huge creature with a short sword wouldn't be so easy, emphasizing they needed to assist him. Tiana shouted that Nick had told them to decide for themselves, but there was no point if he ended up getting killed. Meanwhile, Karan used her sword to cut down goblins, clearing a path towards Nick, who was facing the ogre. She blamed herself for falling behind and getting surrounded by goblins. The ogre shouted, calling Nick an idiot for facing him alone. Nick drew his dagger, agreeing with the ogre, and smiled confidently, stating that he would defeat the ogre despite being called an idiot. Confused, the ogre attacked, slamming its fist into the ground and destroying the earth where Nick stood. Karan, Tiana, and Sem looked on in shock at the sudden attack. However, with swift agility, Nick dodged the strike by leaping into the air. In midair, he questioned the ogre about its intentions. The ogre launched multiple attacks at him, but Nick managed to dodge all of them effortlessly. The ogre shouted that Nick was faster than a monkey, which Nick took as a compliment. He mentioned that his master used to scold him for being slow. Argus, a prodigy and master of various martial arts, had taught him the same style, earning him the nickname Weapon Master. Despite the ogre's continuous attacks, Nick continued to dodge with ease, smiling as he remarked that he wasn't blessed with a big strong body or the ability to wield large swords, but he had learned some effective tricks. With a swift strike, he knocked the ogre to the ground, smirking and attributing it to the short sword techniques taught by his instructor, specializing in close quarters combat. Tiana, Sem, and Karan were shocked to witness Nick's skill in action, finally seeing what he was capable of. The ogre angrily stood up again and intensified his attacks on Nick, fueled by the frustration from not landing a single blow. Despite the ogre's increased power and aggression, Nick continued to dodge effortlessly, frustrating the ogre even more. Tiana, shocked by the scene, called out Sem's name, both of them witnessing Nick's skilled evasion. Sem asked her what was going on, and Tiana expressed disbelief that Nick claimed he couldn't defeat the ogre alone. Sem agreed, acknowledging Nick's strength. Nick shouted at them not just to stand there and urged them to help him. Tiana commented that it seemed like Nick could handle the ogre on his own if he tried, but Nick insisted that there was no way. The ogre slammed the ground in fury, causing it to crack, and Nick smirked at him teasingly. As a warrior, Karan noticed that Nick had no margin for error while toying with the ogre. If he made a misstep, it could cost him his life. While Nick might continue dodging for now, any disruption could easily tip the balance of the situation. Suddenly, the ogre commanded the goblins, and they abandoned Karan to attack Nick. Nick noticed them charging towards him, while the ogre chuckled evilly, preparing his own assault. Nick appeared visibly stressed as Tiana unleashed her magic on the goblins. Meanwhile, Karan swiftly dispatched the goblins with her massive sword. Nick managed to evade the ogre's attack, but a goblin sneaked up behind him. In an instant, Karan appeared, using her true power to ignite and dispatch the goblin with a fiery strike. Everyone, including the ogre, was shocked by her display of strength. This moment not only revealed her formidable abilities, but also exposed her vulnerabilities, a consequence of her past betrayals. Now, however, Karan chose to wield her powers in defense of her companions. Nick and Sem looked stunned by her revelation, while Tiana smiled with satisfaction. Gripping her sword firmly, Karan introduced herself as Karan Tsubaki, a dragon person and the daughter of the Tsubaki family's head. She proudly introduced herself as a dragon warrior blessed with the divine protection of fire dragons. Swinging her sword through the air, she released a wave of heat that even Nick could feel. Suddenly, a goblin charged towards her from behind, but Tiana swiftly dispatched it with her magic, shouting at Karan not to miss her mark either, as this time she wouldn't either. Karan assured her, leaping forward to confront the ogre head-on. With a single powerful strike, she defeated the ogre, engulfing it in flames. Tiana, Sem, and Nick gazed at her with pride and admiration, while Karan returned their looks with a proud smile on her face. After battling down the goblins, Nick carefully collected the materials while Tiana and Sem looked bored. Nick chided them not to act like it was someone else's problem and asked for their help since there were so many materials to gather. Tiana remarked that being an adventurer was not easy, and Sem agreed, noting how taxing it was. Nick noticed that Karan seemed a bit confused. He asked her what was wrong and if she didn't know how to collect the materials. Karan nodded in agreement, tears filling up in her eyes as she apologized for not being able to follow his strategy. Nick looked into her eyes and agreed, but he told her that if they came across a situation like that again, he asked her to think for herself about what she should do. He assured her that if she didn't understand something, he would teach her. She didn't have to pretend to know everything. Karan asked him why he was helping her. Nick wondered how to explain it and told her he couldn't explore alone, and an ogre like that was too much for him. She retorted that anyone could back someone up in battle, implying that wasn't the real reason. Nick pressed her to explain what she meant, but she looked away and simply said it was fine. Accepting her response, Nick asked for her help in collecting materials from the goblins. Karan, in the midst of her task, mentioned that she no longer wanted to trust in partners. Nick smiled wryly, acknowledging he felt similarly about trust. Expressing her dislike for people who offer kindness and then betray others, Karan shared her resolve not to betray anyone and hoped not to be betrayed herself. Nick nodded in understanding. As Karan focused on removing a goblin's horn, Nick complimented her skills and took over the task. Finding it challenging, he wondered if the horn was evolving. Karan noted that handling more ogres would be tough in such conditions. Suddenly, while handling the horn, Nick lost his balance and accidentally fell against Karan. In the process, he inadvertently grabbed her chest, causing her anger to flare. He quickly apologized, but their attention was drawn to a cracking sound. They realized Nick had accidentally broken Karan's pendant. Both of them looked at each other in shock at the unintended damage. After collecting the materials, they returned to the city and their party was finally promoted to F rank without any issue. They cashed in their materials, subtracted expenses like rent, and decided to take a day off. Tiana went to the dragon races, Sem visited a hostess bar, and meanwhile Nick sat on the bench, saddened by the thought that Karan might be angry with him for breaking her pendant. Suddenly, he heard a girl's voice calling him a puppy and asking if he was lost. Looking to see who was speaking, he was shocked to find that it was Agate. Surprised to see her, he noticed she commented that he looked more presentable and asked if he wasn't a lost puppy anymore. Nick was so taken aback that he almost shouted, but Agate quickly covered his mouth to silence him. She explained that she wasn't Agate at the moment. She was just a regular girl enjoying her day off. She warned him not to tell anyone she was there or follow her, as the Order of the Sun would ban him from their shows. Nick nodded in shock, and she leaned towards him with a smile, reassuring him that it was for the best. Sweating nervously, Nick realized he couldn't keep up with the conversation, especially meeting her unexpectedly like this. He asked why she was there, and she explained that her office was nearby. Confused, Nick didn't understand, so she clarified that the location was convenient for surprise concerts and training. But they had to move because fans found out about it. She teased him about the number of people waiting by the exit increasing, then chuckled and admitted she was kidding. She looked down briefly and asked if something was wrong, though she added that he looked better than before. Finally, she sat beside him on the bench. Nick explained the whole incident to her and expressed his concern that if he apologized, she might just say it was all right. She assured him that he didn't need to worry about it, However, Nick persisted, mentioning that if someone broke an accessory she carried with her at all times, even while working, she admitted that she would be upset but clarified that forgiveness wasn't out of the question. Nick wondered if she was serious, to which she responded that if he truly wanted to apologize, perhaps he could buy another pendant like the one he broke. Nick explained he couldn't remember exactly how it looked and she wouldn't let him check. Frustrated, he suggested giving her a different one, but sadly admitted that it might be the best he could do. After pondering for a moment, she pointed out that he was the one who wanted to give her something as an apology. Reflectively, Nick admitted he wasn't sure if that was really what he wanted to say. She wondered if he thought she was still upset, despite saying she would forgive him, implying that he might be projecting his own feelings onto her. Confused, Nick agreed to buy her a pendant. She smiled at him warmly, suggesting that it seemed like his problem was solved. Standing up from the bench, she bid him goodbye. Nick smiled back at her and thanked her for helping him regain his composure. She told him that if he wanted to thank her, he should come to her shows and buy her merchandise, noting that she hadn't seen him around lately. Nick wondered if she had noticed his absence, and she assured him that it was fine, but teased that she did think he was ungrateful, adding that she was used to being disappointed by other fans. Nick was shocked to hear this but relaxed when she started laughing, clarifying that she was just kidding. Before leaving, she advised him to work hard and jokingly asked him to invest in her as well. She reminded him not to forget about the apology from the girl. Nick acknowledged her advice and waved goodbye as she walked away. He smiled, thinking it was now time for shopping, and headed towards the town. Nick went into town browsing through the various pendants on display. He was specifically looking for Karan's silverwork. As he examined the pendants, the merchant asked if his girlfriend liked flower patterns. Nick clarified that it wasn't for his girlfriend, unsure if Karan liked flowers. Disappointed with his options, Nick's stomach growled loudly, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since morning. Knowing there were many good places to eat in the area, he pondered where to go. Suddenly, a voice behind him questioned what he was doing. Startled, Nick turned around to find Karan standing there, looking confused and sweaty. He was shocked to meet her while he was trying to shop for a gift for her. Awkwardly, he mentioned it was a nice coincidence to see her there. She asked what he was up to, and Nick explained he was shopping, then asked if she was there to eat. Agreeing, Karan showed him 8 balls. Nick wondered if they were sold at stalls and confirmed they were indeed 8 balls. With a smile, Nick commented they looked good. Karan asked if he wanted to try one, and Nick, smiling back, agreed. As he picked one up, he wondered if it usually came with sauce, but Karan reassured him it was fine to eat as it was. Nick took a bite and was surprised by how hot it was. Karan asked if it was too spicy. After swallowing, Nick smiled and said it was hot but tasty. Karan then took her turn, enjoying her 8 ball. Observing Karan's calm demeanor, Nick realized she didn't seem upset about him breaking her pendant. He wondered if she truly didn't mind. Karan noticed he looked a bit concerned and asked him what was wrong. He told her it was nothing, and she suggested he could eat more if he wanted to. Thinking that none of the pendants caught his eye, he decided to ask her directly if there was anything she wanted. Confused, she looked at him and said she wanted a safe. Shocked by her response, he clarified that he meant something like footwear or equipment. She replied that she didn't need boots or shin guards. Wondering if she needed any weapons, he suggested a vanguard. She proudly unveiled her sword, explaining that it was made from dragon bones and iron, enhancing the power of dragon people. Nick smiled at her, and she added proudly that the most important thing about the sword was that it didn't break. Nick agreed, noting that it could even cut through an ogre without bending or breaking, making it a sword suitable even at the intermediate level. She blushed and agreed, and Nick wondered if the sword really was that good, but she playfully told him to shut up. She explained that her father had given her the sword, which had been used by her ancestors in wars against demons. Her father had instructed her to carry it because there were many strong and bad people in the human country. Nick commented that her father sounded like a good parent, and she smiled briefly before making a puzzled expression. Admitting she didn't quite understand everything, she shared that she had nearly died once, and losing her most important possession had felt like adding insult to injury. She expressed her dislike for labyrinths because they were damp and smelly, contrasting them unfavorably with her hometown, which she found much better. Nick smiled and remarked that he didn't know about her hometown, but he couldn't imagine it being worse than the city they were in as he continued to eat more balls. She responded that she might come to like the city a bit more, exchanging smiles with Nick. He encouraged her to do her best, and she chuckled, adding that the food was good too. He then brought up the topic again, asking if there was anything else she wanted. She mentioned work that could earn them a lot of money. He pressed her for more specifics, and after some thought, she clarified that she wasn't upset about the pendant incident. Hearing this, he felt a bit embarrassed. She reassured him to just go back to normal, expressing happiness if he focused on exploring labyrinths and defeating monsters. He replied that he was working on that too. As he observed her smile, he didn't say anything further, just smiling back. He jokingly asked if she still doubted him, to which she responded that he was strange to bring that up again. He asked what she meant, and she remarked that no one else talked like that. He brushed it off, saying it wasn't a big deal. They both started giggling, and then Nick said they would slowly start taking on more advanced labyrinths. Once they reached D rank, they could start making good money, allowing her to even go to 3-star restaurants if she wanted. She smiled and added that he could also shower his idol with a mountain of gold coins. Nick joked that if he did that, she would die. He looked at her big smile and thought, while smiling himself, that he would give her something different next time in place of that pendant. They planned their next trip to a new labyrinth together. The next day, they ventured into the Labyrinth of Bonds. They noticed the lightning candles on the walls, and Nick remarked that he had heard about this place, but it looked more like ancient ruins than a labyrinth. Sem asked if there was an artifact here, and Nick confirmed it with a smile, mentioning that according to Wilma, even if they didn't find it, they would be rewarded for just exploring. He suggested they proceed with caution and not get too worked up. Back at the guild, when they received the task to explore the Labyrinth of Bonds, Nick was initially confused. Wilma, an employee of the main office, explained that's why she had called them. Nick questioned if it wasn't a training labyrinth and if it was currently sealed off. Wilma agreed, stating they had received information about an undiscovered treasure, which shocked Karan. Nick asked if she was interested in such things, and she wondered if it was childish. He reassured her that most adventurers were like kids, which made her smile. Nick then asked about the nature of the treasure, and Wilma read off a list, including a magic energy measuring mirror and a transmission orb. Annoyed, Nick pointed out that these were the same magic items they had today, but Wilma advised him not to be too impatient. She then mentioned the last item, the legendary artifact known as the Sacred Sword, the Sword of Bonds. Nick looked confused and asked if Tiana knew about it. Tiana replied that while she knew of swords good at retaining magic, she had never heard of the Sword of Bonds. Wilma smiled as she explained that the Sacred Sword, Sword of Bonds, only existed within the Labyrinth of Bonds. It concentrated the strength of adventurers bound by trust and multiplied it, making it a sacred sword crafted for the ideal adventurer party. Nick nodded silently in response. She asked if he wasn't interested, but he dismissed it as sounding like random gossip. Facepalming, Wilma remarked that they were so cold towards each other despite being perfectly matched. Nick was puzzled by her comment and wondered if she meant their well-balanced composition in combat. She agreed, noting their perfectly balanced front and back rows. She mentioned that she had sent a few parties into the labyrinth, some of which had reached the bottom floor, where they had discovered mass-produced artifacts. She explained that if they didn't reach the bottom floor, that was the end of the mission. Nick asked if they could leave, standing up. Before he could go, Wilma thanked him for agreeing to explore the labyrinth, mentioning there were hidden levels within it, and if he discovered any, they would pay a high price. Even if he didn't find any, they would compensate him for just exploring. She asked him how he felt about that offer. Nick smirked as Wilma proposed paying $30,000 just for exploring the labyrinth.